more in this way. Keep going, keep going,
Keep
keep going.
going.
Hold it there. Okay, now you can pull it out. You good?
Yep, I'm all good.
Let me check focus. Okay. And raise that up a little bit, Carrie. Okay.
Ready here.
George Coker interview, take 2.
Okay.
Maybe just a moment to get focused. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm in good shape.
Check framing here a little bit. Okay. Wow, you're really impressive. I'm so delighted and thrilled. The meaning for this is incalculable. Thank you. Alcatraz. You spoke to me about the POW reunions and how, in some ways, it's a lonely experience for you because you were isolated for so long with this core group of guys who were each of you were in turn isolated. Often you had, I believe, 22 months of solitary.
A lot more than that.
A lot more than that. Talk to me about the experience of solitary, of the isolation at Alcatraz. I mean, obviously, filling time is a huge part of the experience. But I suspect you learn things about yourself over time as well. Speak to me about that experience.
It's a certain respect a dreadful experience, a terrifying experience. I suppose it's very meaningful because you do learn about yourself. I don't know that it's not like you find out something new, but you evaluate what you have done. As you can look back like you as a producer, was that a good shot? Was that a good act? Was that, could have been done better? Should we shot it this way, shot it that way? That takes time. If nothing else, that takes a lot of time. And guess what? When you're in solitary, you got lots of time. You mentioned 22 months. Alcatraz itself was about 26 months. It went in October of 67, and we came out of there in December of 69. Prior to going there, I had probably the least amount of time going in. It was like a year of solitary, not even. The others already had like 2 years. And by the end of that time, all except me had 4.5 years plus the solitary. I was 3.5, but then I went back into solitary when they did later for another couple of months. So I ended up right at 4 years. So that's an awful lot of time to think. And I say that's the big thing as you analyze yourself, you wind up knowing yourself, for better or for worse. That's what it is. Here I am, take it or leave it. Whereas before you can live in, my favorite thing, self-hypnosis. You can convince yourself of anything. You can rationalize anything. And we might very well go ahead and do that some more. But at least at one time, you knew exactly who you were, what you counted for. There was no way to hide, When would you break, or what was worth fighting for in your heart? And it has nothing to do with this, but it also is the perfect answer. I was talking to a group of high school kids, and Pam and my middle daughter was there. And somehow, this was not structured. I don't like to give speeches as such, especially I don't like to preach. They got off in this thing about priorities in life and how you would do that and how you do this. And I said, well, I'll tell you, if you want to know what to do, just tell me what your list of priorities and you'll have all your answers. I said, all the decisions, is not a decision of questions about what you're talking about at the moment. It's really, what does fit in your priority list? When you know your priorities, I will tell you exactly what you should do, because that's what you claim. And if you don't like that, then your priorities aren't right. Not in terms that they should be one way or the other. I'm just saying, what are your priorities? Well, of course, that came back to me. And some of the things we talked about, scouts, religion, sports, school, education. And I finally told him what my top. I said, big thing, top 5. That's after that it gets a lot harder. It was a 6 or 7 or 7 and 6, and you get further down, the less very definitive. But I said, if you really work at it, you can come up with your top 5 priorities in the right order, and that will tell you what to do wherever you go. You won't have to think about it. You'll know what to do. And so I got into that, and one of them got down to the family and where the family fit in. And the old question, well, if you're in a boat and it was sinking and, you had to give somebody, basically what it boiled down to is, was there a priority within your family? And I said, yeah. And their eyes went wide. They couldn't believe that somebody would say that. You stop and think, is that a surprise? Only surprised when I would say it. And I said, yes, I do have a. And of course, Elizabeth, am I first or third? Of course, I never told them. But I said, yes, in my list of priorities, when it got to the family portion, there was very definitely, I've already thought about it, in that time. And that's the kind of soul searching you can do when you're in solitary for a long time. You got a lot of other pressures. You're getting tortured, you're in pain, you're suffering. One that Mulligan brings up, you're very lonely. I mean, the tap code broke that up somewhat, but still, it's very lonely. I didn't talk to anybody except a Gook interrogator for 2.5 years. You never had anybody to comfort you or say, hang in there, or, pull yourself up, except via tap code, not by a human voice. So it was mighty darn lonely. And besides filling in the time with just thinking about stuff, building houses, which I did all that, building cars, which I did all that, living in different places, which I did all that, evaluating the type of a person you'd like to meet or marry in the future, which I did all that. One of the things is just this self-evaluation. And that could be frightening. But you finally come to see who you are. And if I can't say about other POWs in general because they didn't have that time. I mean, that is, if you want to call it an advantage, that's the one thing we got out of that long solitary that nobody else had the opportunity to do what we did, so to speak, is to evaluate yourself. And I think if you talk to any of the Alcatraz guide, if you talk about it, you would see there was that distinction. They knew who they were with all their warts, with all their screwiness, with all their foibles. They knew who they were, for better or for worse. And if you want to say thanks to solitary, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
You say that experience can be frightening. How is that? How is it? What is frightening about finding yourselves?
Well, you picture yourself as somebody. Let's say, some of the quirks like in there. You picture yourself being a big, tough military guy. What if you find out you're not? You may not be big. In my case, certainly not big. You may not be tough. In my case, I'm not so sure how tough I was. Courageous, maybe. But all these things you automatically jump to conclusion. Are you really like that? Now, it wasn't that much problem for me. I know it was for other people because I thought about it relative to my family members, but not a bit. Do you love your wife? Of course I do. Do you really? You say you love your wife, but what would you do to take care of her, look after her? This came back to the same thing with my relative to my family. Would you die for her? Sometimes, oh yeah. Would you suffer for her? Because that was the thing we've learned through torture. It's easy to die. That's frequently a one-time decision. Going through torture time and time again is a multi-thing that never goes away, and it's always threatening itself. So yeah, you really ask it, how much do I really care about her? How much would I give of me to take care of her? In my case, my family. Or the fact that you're not a big, tough, macho military man, does that mean you can't be a good military man? You find out maybe you're not even courageous. I think there's a reason that man doesn't really know himself because I'm not so sure he can deal with it. But yeah, it's a frightening experience because you automatically assume everything is going to be nice, but you also, like I say, you're going to point out all your weaknesses and you're going to have to accept them. course, the good side of that then is you always, in the future, try to work around your weaknesses and, cater to your strengths, which you do develop and figure out as you sit there tearing yourself apart. So the good part is great, but the bad part is frightening.
So it's fair to say, and I'll ask this as a question, if you could speak to me about forgiveness in both the Hanoi prison system among you and your fellow prisoners, as well as with yourself.
I think Mulligan makes me think about some of this more than I would on my own. Amongst ourselves, it was relatively easy because we're all in the same boat. We're all being beat up the same way. We're all failing to one degree or another and living up to the great expectations of whatever they may be. So you both seek or need forgiveness, as, of course, then obviously you need to give it to others. And that's part and parcel of the stuff we've already discovered in terms of springing back, of not giving up, of not quitting, of going on. Yeah, it's been tough. We understand. No hard feelings. We don't hold it against you. The assumption is that you're going to stand up the next time and go through it again. So in that respect, forgiveness is is part of the package. And it's not something that we would think of consciously, oh, it is time for me to forgive you, or it is time for you to forgive me. It's just something that happens. Without it, things wouldn't have happened well. With it, I guess in a way you could even call it the bonding experience, so to speak. That we've been through this together, and right now it's your time to be up and my time to be down, but next week it could very well be the other way around. In a certain respect, that forgiveness was not an effort. Only part that was an effort if you weren't going to try again, or if you didn't really give it a fair shot to begin with, and now you're not going to stand up and spring back and go at it again. Then the forgiveness becomes the difficult situation. Yeah, maybe I do, maybe I don't type thing. But I would say in our situation that was relatively uncommon because most guys were giving it their best shot. Forgiving yourself, that's a totally different story. Totally different story. A lot of guys beat themselves up early, but again, with time, that's a big factor, not just solitary, but just time in general. Slowly, I watch people rationalize themselves out of it. And I don't say that necessarily in a negative way. They learn to cope with it, to deal with it. Okay, I failed or whatever, and I'm not such a bad guy. It's interesting how someone go from that to being I'm a hero. But that's life. Human beings are a funny creature. But you do have to learn to live, if you want to call it, with yourself and to forgive yourself. And again, in solitary, had a lot of time to think about it. You couldn't hide behind it. You realized that you had, you really screwed up here. But that's life. Forgive yourself. Move on, cope with that, change your ways, don't do it again. What more can you do? But you had to accept that forgiveness of yourself and not to force yourself to live up to some artificial standard. Not that it's a bad standard, but one that you couldn't do at the time. But that doesn't mean you won't try to do it next time. So like I say, forgiveness played a big part, but the harder part was amongst us for yourself rather than your fellow POWs who were overall doing a good job. Forgiving yourself can be very, very tough.
It's safe to say that Vietnam War, Carrie, do you want to see what you can do? Yeah. Was a controversial war at best. When the release of the POWs was scheduled in many ways for the government, it was what you and your fellow POWs were one of the few things that they could show the country and say, this is a good thing. So you became a symbol, and it must have been, and a lot of expectations were laid upon you in returning. You were given ticker tape parades and whatever. And for a lot of you who had been in isolation for years, who began through such difficult circumstances, it must have felt like the public needed one thing from you, but perhaps you needed very different things. The word hero was used a lot, and I personally feel that those of you who I've met and talked to are heroes. Not for the reasons probably that many people might think. You're not heroes simply by the fact that you were tortured and went through horrible experiences. To me, you're a hero because of exactly what you've been communicating. It's the way you've met it, and who you found yourself to be, and the way you've risen, and the way you treat your fellow prisoners. Can I ask you about heroes? What you think? Did you know heroes in your estimation in the Hanoi prison systems? How do you look at heroism?
I guess kind of as an artificial standard. We were concerned with doing our duty and not being considered, not performing adequately. We weren't thinking about being heroes. And hero, believe it or not, in prison camps, George and I tapping the wall, one of those big discussions, Phil at the time, we would just discuss in terms of bravery and courage and exactly what they mean, kind of like Plato was approaching. You can't really say until you know what the word means and what's the differences. And being a hero is a very artificial word. It's strictly something like beauty. It's in the eyes of the beholder. We didn't see any heroes. Maybe you did, or maybe you do. I just don't think that. It doesn't strike me that way. Would I say, no, I am not a hero? It's not I'll just keep my mouth shut. It's not my call to make. I don't dictate if I'm a hero. Maybe actions might do it, but you're the ones to pass judgment. That's why that courage, bravery thing that we came up with, that we find courage was personal. Bravery was the evaluation of the group or the culture or the other people. Courage was internal. Well, being a hero, you can't make that just simply internal. I can go back to the part that said, I did my best. I'm satisfied when I look back. I did my best. But the term hero, that's strictly on the outside, that bravery concept. So if somebody said at that time, if you could put me, that man is stuck down there, are they heroes? I guess so. But that just wasn't part of the lingo. We were trying to do our best and encourage, if you want to call her the weaker or whatever, to do their best, to pick everybody up as a group, to do our best. Heroes weren't part of that, unless you judge so later. We have a real disconnect there. Our experience makes us see the world in a certain way that you will never see it. It just makes us different. But whereas that's wonderful that you see somebody, including us, as heroes, and I'm sure that's guided and that's good, but I can't ever see myself, and as much as I respect and love CAG and Jerry and Still Mulligan stuff, I never think of them as heroes. So I'm not sure where else I can go with that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. That is really clear. Let's talk about courage then. You and Jerry spoke about courage and bravery through the walls. And it's something that young officers, one of the things that's probably overrides, if you really get someone down who's 19, 20 years old, midshipman at the Naval Academy or cadet at West Point or whatever, or whoever, a seaman, and they're contemplating a career or at least a path in the military, there's got to be a question somewhere deep inside. When I get tested, what will I prove to be? Can you speak to me about courage, please?
Well, I said that was a very, if you want to call it, academic, intellectual discussion, although it brought out real merit in terms of what was courage. And the way we broke it down and decided which term to use for which action was, we said if we both did the same thing, whatever this is, we jumped up and down and did 35 push-ups, and the culture said, because of that, you are brave. Well, we did the same thing, so you could say both of us are brave. But if one of us is terrified of doing push-ups for some strange reason, and the other guy doesn't give two hoots about it because he does 10 times that many push-ups every day of the week. So for one of you, it takes a humongous effort, inner effort, to do the same thing that this guy takes for granted and doesn't think anything of it. So you're both branded brave heroes. One of you was extremely courageous, and the other, that was not even a factor. That's when we say courage is a personal situation and how you deal with the things around you. And you never know when you try to compare two people where it's going to fall out, because the little example we came up with, they were extremely different. That he had to figure out his. All he would have to do is, let's make the test something that terrifies the heck out of him. Doesn't bother me. We both wind up being brave, branded heroes, but over here, one of us is struggling like hell to hang in there, and the other of us is taking a pipe walk. So the big thing about courage is to realize you're going to confront things that scare the bejesus out of you, that terrorize you. And I could give you numerous very, very real examples of that, but over there, and even since coming home. And the question is, what are you going to do? The stupid little idea, to be a hero, you got to do 20 push-ups. Well, now you're scared to death, you're terrified, the absolute worst thing in the world, last thing you want to do is 20 push-ups. The question is, are you going to do them anyway? That's courage. And everybody has their own little things, the part of it. But whenever it does come, what's going to make you courageous is that you, if you want to say, do the right thing. You do what is necessary in spite of being scared to death. That's courage. And you better expect that it will happen, and will you be ready to do the right thing?
You talked about one of the pillars of what kept you going was your faith. Talk to me about the role of faith in the military and in hard situations and in your life.
Faith plays a very, very big role. And in general, it did with a lot of other people too, not just me. Faith has a certain advantage over everything else in that it cannot be directly attacked. It can be attacked superficially. But just because you can't prove there is a God, you can't prove there isn't. That gives you ability, your faith, to remain somewhat aloof. And if you're not dedicated to other types of things, and there could be an awful lot of things, for me, the other two big things were sports and scouts, is this could be the anchor pin at all times. This is something you can believe in and trust in, and all the ideals you learned about it that I learned maybe in other places, you can hold on to. And it definitely is part of the 3 or 4 or 5 things that in general are the things that the guys drew from that kept them going. And faith was a very, very strong one. It also, there's a lot of culture associated with any kind of faith religion. And they can bolster you in times. The memories, the ideas, the reliving of them in your own mind, the idea of praying together. We had church service over there every day. You want to call it church service, but everybody tried to take time at one time on Sunday and quit, and everybody would just say Lord's Prayer. Well, why would you do that without faith? But that little coherent thing, all the effort we put into it, I mean, across all the camps, was something you held on to. Faith, just like they preach, it's very inspirational, very binding, gives you a great, contributes to a great sense of hope. And if I was going to try to single something out that maybe you don't usually think about, it is Hope and faith go together. I'm talking now philosophically. I'm not trying to get in a religious argument. They go together. If you don't have one, you probably are not going to have the other. You may say you do it. You may, play games with it. And the same thing, if you don't have faith, you probably aren't going to have much by way of hope. And hope is a wonderful thing. Hope will keep you going through some really terrible, terrible times. And as a fallout, because they want the hope, the faith goes with it. How do you tear these things apart? Faith winds up playing an extremely important role. But I would say 90%, 95% of the people over there. And
There's a significant story about this involving a Sunday morning service that took place in Alcatraz, I believe, was it? Or were you back at, was it at Alcatraz at that point, or were you back at?
are you leading up to the church riot, or
Yeah.
that was after we'd moved into Camp Unity as a group?
Can you tell me that story, please?
We had just been, for the first time, moved together into a large group that we call Camp Unity on Christmas night of 70. So this is basically 71. And we are now suddenly trying to figure out how to live together. I mean, all of a sudden, there's a room of 75 people. I mean, it was absolutely mind-boggling. You may take that for granted. But think about the old Geico commercial, the caveman walking by, even a caveman can do it, and how does this caveman fit in? That's about the way we felt. We each a caveman looking around this group of human beings, trying to, who are we? Where are we? What's going on here? It was really very weird, but they coalesced. All the seniors were in this room. I was there too, unfortunately, I guess. And they had done these religious services kind of plain, and the week before we'd sort of done a little bit of a religious service, and the Gooks raised hell. We can't do things together. We can't be coordinated. You can't stand, just. And so they decided to call them on this. So besides being a religious thing, whether you like it or not, it was also going to be political, I suppose. And so they said, we're going to conduct a religious service, come hell or high water. And it just so happens that Robbie Reisner was asked to give a leading prayer of sorts, and the other guy was Howie Rutledge, both of them very big faith-oriented people. And for some reason, I guess because in talking to people, they thought I knew the stories of the Bible better, whatever else. I would, not so much a sermon, I'd sort of give the gospel. I would give a gospel story, not as a sermon as such. So we were the three key participants. So that Sunday came up as the middle of February, so it's, like February 14th, 15th. We've only been together in this big group for 6 weeks, and with a lot of tension, both internal and external, going on. And we conduct this church service. And the next thing we know, the Gooks are at the door, fully manned and armed, bayonets mounted, busting into the room, being pushed around. And Robbie and Howie and myself got dragged out into the front of the courtyard. This is room 7, which is an infamous piece of terminology in the POW world. And we're spread out, 3 guys out here across the yard, a good 30 feet apart from each other. And the Academy guy says there's something that came from them. They started singing this, hey, rah, rah, something. This is room 1. How are you, room 2? And somehow the sequence of rooms, they pass it up. At the end, we were room 7. They pass up. So all of a sudden, there's this yelling and screaming coming out of a picture, any kind of a prison compound. Here we are, an old prison, and they're yelling and screaming. And then they start singing the Star Spangled Banner. Well, the Gooks are going nuts. They must have probably a company, well over 100 guys, like I said, mounted bayonets, ready to do damage if have to be. And a much later type of thing to show how 2 different people have 2 totally separate mentalities. Robbie Reisner talked later in some of his speeches, said, man, when he started singing the Star Spangled, I felt 9 feet tall. And when they built the monument, the bronze monument, Robbie out at the Air Force Academy. It stands there. It's a 9-foot tall statue with that quote underneath it. It'd been much easier to build my statue because I felt about a 1/4 inch tall. All I saw was the dread of Alcatraz, the solitary, getting the living crap beat out of me, and I wanted to, at that moment, I'd been just to die, just to melt and go away. I didn't want to face anymore because all hell was going to break loose. And I have no idea how. He was somewhere in the middle. The outcome of that, I mean, good and bad of it, is that raised such a hell. They ripped Room 7 apart. They took out all of the O5s, kind of like when they ripped Alcatraz, the guys off, they figured they'll take that away right away. All the senior officers pulled out. And they negotiated what we could do for a church service in the future, which both sides agreed on. And I went into solitary for another 2 months. Back to where I started, almost the very first cell. I was back in that little 8-room dungeon-like place in Heartbreak Hotel. I said when I was sitting there looking first on how to do tap code, I was right back in the same place. And I, at that time, I was really in bad psychological shape, and that solitary did not help one bit. That was the famous church riot, or the infamous church riot.
And you're a practicing Catholic.
Yes.
You were raised Catholic.
Yep.
What does it mean to you now when you attend a church service? Does it comfort you? Does it, when you, this many years later, you have a wife who loves you, you have children of your own, and I believe grandchildren, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you can now look at a different world. You're spending this part of your year down in this beautiful place, and when you go to church, do you reflect on where you have been brought now? Can you speak about that?
Well, I certainly reflect on it. I think I don't know if it's good, bad, a difference that it seems like you can be very, very strong, religious, faith-driven in hard times. And in easy times, it's much easier just to kind of forget it. And I think that's very true. It happens to me. It happens, I think, probably to everybody. And sometimes in the good, comfortable times, it's a little bit harder to remember what you'd been through and why you believe certain things. But I was there when, as far as I'm concerned, God pulled me through, and what I was doing, I just couldn't do. It was, and that faith literally being picked up, and the many stories when I'm carrying on your shoulders because there's only one set of footprints, or something like that. And I once blew some people's minds momentarily when I said, I don't have faith. I don't have to. I know there's a God. He was there. He took care of me. I know. But with that degree of intensity, sometimes it kind of slides away over time. So it's easy, let's say, to be lax then, but your heart's never been in being lax. You still go back to the old things you learn. You got to do what's right. Sometimes it's unpleasant or uncomfortable. Don't let the little things bother you or blind you from what is the right thing to do, the proper action to take. But I would say, yeah, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of a different climate, you might say, to faith today when things are fun and comfortable than when it was very intense and difficult and trying. It's just as important. And I would hate to think that, somehow I'd suddenly completely drift away from it and, deny what I thought I lived through. And one of the big things, too, and I guess this is some fairly more recent philosophical thinking, is that even if I got to that point, the thing that would ever keep me from making that drift away from faith was to realize I would also lose hope. And to me, if nothing else, that I would want to instill. If I had a gift to pass down to you, for sure, would be the hope that you can survive, the hope that you can do better, the hope that you can raise a family, the hope that you'll be a good father or whatever. And if faith is important to instill in hope, it's absolutely something worth fighting to keep.
Beautiful, sir. Obviously, in today's military, and in military throughout history, finding the best way to help returning warriors find their way again in quote normal life. The word PTSD comes up a lot, and one of the things that the military is keen is to understand as much as they can about how best to help returning warriors. You have spoken about, if you could, about some of the symptoms of PTSD you experience. If you could describe some of those, and if you would, sir, share your thoughts on how best we can help.
Like a lot of things I mentioned before, sometimes the simple answers are really the easiest and best answers. Then we can get to an awful lot of details and bureaucratic, bubbling. The biggest thing with PTSD is it's going to cause you to have nightmares. Plain and simple, which can both disrupt your sleep, and what's really bad part of it is that if you physically start to react to some of it in some way. So like Pam learned very early on that if I start doing strange things by my arm, she doesn't reach over to try to comfort me, because that's a good way to get slugged. After being whacked the first time, she always does it from a distance. She always keeps 2 big pillows next to us in bed, so if all of a sudden I get crazy, she just throws those between us so that I can go through my antics without, belting her. So just the nightmares, that's bad enough. That makes life miserable. But if you also have a certain amount of physical reaction to it, that can really be a problem. There's a couple that I don't know if I'll mention for myself, but the big thing on triggers is some things will trigger guys to react in a physical way. The classic thing, a bang goes off and they dive for cover in a restaurant. Those are real situations, not something to laugh at, but that's a simple example that one you might be able to understand. I don't know that I have something quite like that where I'm always worried something like that would happen. But since I'm conscious of it, I like to think that I overrule the probability that a particular trigger would cause me to take some kind of a violent physical reaction. How do I deal with it? I've worked with a psychologist that did a lot, gave me some really good ideas that helped me deal with certain things to try to keep it, you might say, under control, where I can't control it, to avoid things that are going to get me riled up and upset. Looking back on it, it's obvious. At the time, it's not so easy to see. To jump away from that to one thing, we say, geez, what should we do? The number one thing a combat soldier needs is just TLC, a little bit of tender loving care. You come back from that conflict, you need your wife or your girlfriend, your mom or somebody to hug you and say, we love you, we're glad you're home, we're happy you're here. In Vietnam, that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, they were ridiculed. These guys need to readjust from a very violent, unpleasant, what you could almost call inhuman type existence, back to normality. If you just receive them back to normality, that would solve, I'd say 80% of your PTSD, or put it back into the situation where it's just memories and stuff like that. Because even the violent stuff, the triggers in me really come from, you might say, political issues or things that relate back that are similar to there that I did not like. So it's like I'm refighting the war. If you could get rid of it, but just hug them. And there's a world of difference. I mean, one thing, the POWs have done much better in that respect than the average veteran. That's because POWs, we were treated like heroes. And everybody loved us. You're great. Everything you did was good. Hey, psychologically, that's what I need. I need just a little tender loving care. And we got it. We got it by bushels. And so in that respect, that type of adjustment overall, we've done pretty good. But man, when you don't get that, you get hell to pay. Today, like they mentioned Afghanistan, the trauma that caused a lot of PTSD, they are received somewhat better, but you'd be surprised in a lot of ways they are not. Superficially, They are. But, you know, you talk about junior officers, they know when they got leadership. They also know when they've been sold a bill of goods by administrations and stuff. They have not been treated all that well in reality. And I think that probably contributes to some of the, in the end, the PTSD, because when they feel comfortable, when they feel they got good leadership, when they feel that their mission is just and stuff, it enables them to deal with those things and overcome it. Leadership hasn't been real red hot. And it's affecting that poor soldier on the ground. He gets reasonably good, tender, loving care when he gets home. But I don't think it's nearly as much as you might think, because, like I say, you only see the superficial.
You describe a specific instance of PTSD that happens for you upon entering church. Can you describe that? Because I think understanding that, we might be able to break down and help understand how a certain moment can come up out of the blue sky.
I'm starting to wonder if I should have talked to you, because it just is something that I recently ever revealed to anybody else.
Oh,
Not
so
that's a big
sorry.
secret, but like
I'm
say
so
Pam
sorry.
heard,
Oh,
so I'll tell you.
I'm pleased.
But it just was something, it was like, it was my deal, it's nobody else's business. Nobody needed to know. It seemed weird to me, so you just go about your business, it didn't hurt anything. I never kneel in church. Well, I've got damaged knees, a lot of people know that, so if it ever comes up, it hurts my knees. That's a very legitimate reason. How about me? I'm handicapped, I can't kneel. So everybody was very satisfied with that. And it just, by accident, came up in conversation only a month or so ago, because I think, in check with Pam, it's the first time she ever heard me say this. That's not why I don't kneel. That if I kneel, and it doesn't have to be in church anywhere else, except church is usually the only place you kneel, bam, a trigger hits me, and I'm back in Vietnam struggling to survive. I mean, it happens that quick. And believe me, anything that's happening around me now is absolutely incidental. I may physically be in church, but I might as well as not be. I'm not listening, hearing thing. I don't know what's going on. I'm looking at, do I have to get out of this pew? I mean, I am gone in my head. And I figure, you know, you probably should kneel down. Because obviously it ends all church service for you at that exact moment. And as soon as I sit down or stand up for something else, it goes away really quick. I start having like a very mild, leftover kind of nightmarish type thing. Thoughts are floating through my head, but nothing real strong, nothing you can't kind of put aside. So it's like a damn switch. You turn it on, and my world totally, violently changes in my head, and you turn the switch off. I'm back home. So I never kneel when I at church, because I like to stay at church for the time being. And that's a trigger. There's some other things that could happen, and that's the closest that I did. A guy hears a loud crash or bang and he dies for the tail. That is similar to me. And why that versus something else? Yeah, kneeling was a pain. And I do know that when I have that situation happen, I'm not thinking of kneeling. I'm thinking of some other very, very horrible, violent things were happened to me, but for some reason, kneeling triggers it. And I don't know if any amount of research could ever explain that. All that counts is I know it does, and therefore I don't do it. But that's the weird world of PTSD.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because that kind of story is exactly what those who are, Ev Alvarez and his wife are working with, trying to help returning warriors with PTSD. Those little stories can help those who are confused about the symptoms they're experiencing to understand these are the things that can trigger. This is the kind of thing, it doesn't make sense to you, but so I thank you for sharing that story, and I'm sorry if it was a probing question that took you in a place that you didn't want to go, and I really mean that. You spoken about honor. You know, in your Boy Scout oath, it's the opening phrase, and this project is called Return with Honor. Colonel Athens, who was the brainchild behind this project getting off the ground, when he first encountered the phrase that coalesced so many of you to return with honor, that you would dedicate yourselves to returning with honor, he made up a sign. His 9 children, retired Marine Colonel, and he made up a sign that said "Return with Honor," and he put it on the inside of above the door of the house, so that every time his children left, they read those words. Speak to me about return with honor.
I was going to say, I was wondering if he was a graduate of Benedict's. One of the things that kept me going sports all the time is you went down into the locker room from the football field was kind of downstairs in a bay. Benedict hates a quitter. That hates a quitter has gone through my mind thousands of times. That was lead effort in sports when it said, you know, how did it support me? No matter how down, you hate a quitter. And I think honor kind of goes back, ties together a whole lot of these things. You know, did you quit? Did you keep going? Did you do your best? Did you give it your all? Okay, you got broken down or whatever you want to call it. Did you step up and you know, get ready for the next play? So the return with honor was, yeah, if you could kind of say yes to those things. So that was the goal. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't something that you would win. But have you lived up to all of these, if you want to call them fancy sayings? Have you turned these fancy academic expressions into real world action? If you did, you could return with honor. And even some of the pieces of it, don't bow, don't speak in the radio, don't accept early release. These are things that were validating your resistance to the best of your ability. So we had a couple of specific things that if you did that, actually, obviously it wouldn't be honorable. But in the end, return with honor is, can you look at yourself with self-respect? Can you look in the mirror and say, I did my best? And that was not an automatic thing when you said, oh, geez, looking back, oh, yeah, those heroes, they're great heroes, man. They did a great job. They got the crap torch out of them. Like being tortured somehow makes you great or hero. It makes you hurt in my book. We were concerned, were we doing the honorable thing? Were we living up to the various standards? And the encouragement, the whole concept when they put out, and it's called the Return with Honor program, if you want to call it that, a policy, was, hey, let's live up to these standards. And going back to people like Stockdale and Denton, they never ask anybody to do something they didn't do. And that's one of the reasons they stand out. They have more times in stocks, more times in shackles, more times cuffed behind the back, more times getting the living crap deal out of them, more times in solitary. Nobody else can match them for that. So they were setting the pace, they were setting an example and just telling you, do your very best. And then we can return with honor. Not only individually, the big thing there is that we will turn with honor as a group. And I think we did a pretty good job.
Absolutely. One of the things that those who don't serve in the military sometimes don't really understand in the civilian life and world is the bond of brotherhood, the bonds of comradeship that can be found sometimes. It's such a rare thing. I'm assuming that based on your stories that you experienced that in the Hanoi prison system and your experiences there. Speak to me about, as I think it was Ev Alvarez said to me, you know, we had a policy that you would cover your brother's back because you know he would do that for you. Like you would do anything for each other because you know they would do that for you. Speak to me about that rare quality.
We come from different worlds. It's not rare. In your world it was, in our world there it wasn't. Bonds were formed in many different ways, sometimes over very short terms, and that was not because you needed long term, but sometimes that's all you had. And I say overall, I'm talking about a very, very large percentage, 90% plus guys were giving it their all. They were doing a good job. So it was easy to bond with them. We had the similar types of failings. We forgave each other. We encouraged each other in a similar way. So this bond formed, but it wasn't a bond because of friendship and drinking buddies or playing golf every Saturday. It was a bond in the face of humongous pain and stress and suffering and terror. So that bonding element winds up taking on a larger degree of import than it would when you think of this group over here bonding in the normal world, let's say. That the bonding took part was kind of a natural thing. Would you expect it not to, really? The only thing that would have interrupted it, and a few dents in the bonding, so to speak, that did exist, was where people weren't doing their part. They weren't living up, or at least trying to some degree, not as maybe as well as you were doing, or as well as anybody else in this particular room was doing, but they were doing and giving it their best shot and trying to swing back as best they could. But if they completely fell down the mark, and a few, I'm talking about a half dozen or so, did, then they wouldn't bond. And in fact, that happened. It came back to people that we'd have nothing to do with. But we're talking about 5 or 6 people. But overall, the bonding was formed in the fire and the trial of fire. And you should expect that. It worked. And it continued to exist. And how strong that bond is later is really how much you shared at the time. It's not that the bond wasn't there, but the force of it could change by your presence, your ability, or the things you went through. But there's still a common bond. You want to talk about, we don't know very many people, the guys at Alcatraz, because we spent so much in solitary, we didn't get a chance to meet anybody else. It doesn't mean there wasn't a bond there. You still got the bond of a POW. That is a very real bond in the group. And Paul says nice things about me at times, maybe a little bit of an exaggeration. But don't mess with POWs. We know each other, we like each other, we tolerate each other, and we probably got a better grasp of how screwed up we are than anybody else does. So just go peddle your paper somewhere else.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There are a couple of things that really strike me in hearing you speak. One is that you have a very strong moral compass. You, through a lot of things, determined somewhere along the way where's north. Like this is. Speak to me about the importance of a moral or ethical compass. And no one could have anticipated the circumstances that you went through, but somehow along the way you got formed by things like your schooling and your sports and everything and scouts, and they helped you develop this sense of this is the right direction. Can you speak to me about the importance of that? Because I'll add one thing, a lot of young people today don't necessarily see that as an ingredient. They see career paths, they see choices, they see Twitter, they see all this other opportunities, but they don't necessarily go back to those rooted, very fundamental things. If this is the first thing I need, the rest of it will come.
Well, again, to me, what's automatic to other people is debatable. Like, our backgrounds are different. We actually come from, in a certain respect, 2 different cultures. I can see the youth being there, and the only, I won't say excuse, the way I would understand it, is their moral compass has been set for them, even if they don't particularly, if you're going to grasp it with great gusto, but either their religion has told them, or sports has told them, or their military has told them, so they just accept it without thinking about it. And so they're busy doing all this other junk, but because of other people's influence, not really a inward, heartfelt, conscious decision of their own. They're classic, they're going with the flow. Nothing surprising about that. That's really the common, the norm. Been in human nature like that for thousands of years. And how to tell them, hey guys, you ought to stop and think about what you're doing sometimes. It's not going to change anything, or at least hopefully it won't change anything, but you ought to base it on something more than just a casual acceptance of somebody else's guidance. Of course, to the extreme opposite of that type of situation you thought about was the solitary and Alcatraz. We had time to think through this. Believe me, we came up with what we thought was, if you want to call it a more conscious, we knew exactly who we were and where we were headed and why. That's not an easy thing to inject into a young kid today. I'm not sure exactly how, other than just asking that question sometimes. What do you believe and why? If you could just get them to challenge that. Sometimes they're, well, what if they change their mind? Or what if they don't accept this guidance? Well, if they don't, what good are they really to you in the future if you can't count on them? Or is your position so weak that they're going to give it up when they really think it through? That's not a very good indication of how solid your so-called moral compass is. I have no fear of that. I think deep down somewhere, we've been evolving for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe a few million. We got a great deal of capacity. Even those crazy kids out there texting on their phones and driving all the stupid crap they do, there's still a backbone in there somewhere. They just got to find it and figure it out. And I'm not afraid of challenging, asking, why are you doing this? What do you believe in? What are you going to get out of it? And they'll probably go just like they're talking about careers and all the other stuff. And yeah, but what counts? Like I put it in those talks, what's your priority? And if somehow asking those questions, you get them to stop and think about it for 30 seconds, you took a huge step in the right direction. And the only thing I can think of, well, what if you tell them? What if you don't? I'm not sure you can really threaten them with something because it's hypothetical. The closest thing that might get their attention is just to point out there a lot of other people have been there and they were forced to make some very, very hard choices. And they figured out that a moral compass was extremely important. And if nothing else, looking at them, you might say, maybe I should spend a little more time and effort and figure out mine. And that's probably about as close as you're going to get right now.
You have a beautiful home here, right in the Keys. You're surrounded by water on all sides. You had a career in the Navy. You were talking to Bill and I about long 2-mile walks you would take along the isthmus there. And when you walk and enjoy the life that you've so well earned that you have now with your wife, do you ever think about the freedoms that you have and what they mean to you?
Absolutely. I guess I'm a little bit strange at times, weird. Pam can give you better indications, but I don't know if you want to call it meditate. I think a lot. And maybe you could call it meditation. You might put some kind of a spiritual thing. But when I'm walking, even when I'm swimming, I'm thinking about stuff. And just mulling over my mind, what's been going on and what if. And very frequently that very stuff comes up to realize that, okay, you're doing this, but what if? And that time of thinking, in a certain respect, not in an uncomfortable way, but it's like that time in solitary. All that time I spend thinking is the freedom to search for answers, search for ideas, search for where your compass is still going today, And I do frequently think about that. I don't take that for granted one iota. Even today, in this respect, Jim and I are carbon copies. We went through much the same thing, although he's a lot older than me, but like I don't care what the outside temperature is, nice, pleasant, good, bad, that we keep our house heated or cool to 72 degrees and low humidity. We have had it with the prickly heat of the summer and the chills and no clothes to combat it in the winter and the humidity to make life miserable. We can afford it. That's one thing we're not going to do. So just as simple an act of that, we don't take it for granted. And some things we deliberately act on, such as that, and other things we just remind ourselves that life is no guarantee. You know which way it's going. And perhaps we're a little bit more optimistic than other people because we just think, life goes on and we'll make the best of it and hope for the future. That if it's, instead of just assuming it's good, we're going to work to make it better. So I think as we think about that and look at the great joys and blessings we have, I think we might be a little bit happier, a little bit more optimistic than the average bear.
Fantastic. You've covered so much. Let me double check the time so I make sure that we're keeping honest with you. You've touched on it, but I think it's a kind of important thing to highlight here is for the audience that I know is going to listen and share in your words. Speak to me about gratitude, because it seems to me that you understand it at its core.
I'm hesitating and puzzling because sometimes, no matter what happens, like I mentioned briefly before, just all of a sudden I'd mentioned something about the kneeling, which I'd never mentioned before. New things pop up, and the term gratitude, in a certain respect, is a new term relative to the experience. And I'm trying to think, where does that fit in? With all my meditation and thinking, I haven't thought of that particular connection. So I'm kind of puzzled as to how to answer it. I'm obviously very grateful for the things I got. And the counter to that is, like I say, we don't take very much for granted. I don't know if that's exactly the opposite of gratitude or not. We are aware that anything good, bad, or indifferent can and probably will happen. I guess since you might say we have learned to accept life. We know ourselves. We know where we fit in. We know who we love and care about. We have our moral compass. That we are willing to accept and deal with to the best of our ability whatever the future holds. And in that respect, we're very grateful for what we have. And maybe, I can't say more so than other people, but maybe in a deeper sense than other people, because it's not academic that things can be a whole lot worse. And even in the current problems that we may be dealing with, we realize that this is part of life and that we can deal with it. It may hurt. And even then, you're going to be grateful that you have the wherewithal or God's blessings or whatever it takes, that you can deal with it and still remain happy. You won't let this tear you apart. So, like I said, I wouldn't call that you're more grateful. But I think you can say you're grateful about life with a lot deeper meaning, so to speak, or a deeper feeling. And I definitely feel that way myself. I mean, going back to where we were before, when I said I think about these things, I don't take them for granted. And with all the possible problems I could list with you, and troubles that I'm having and people that I don't like or whatever, I can also say, man, I'm really thankful for the blessing God's given me. I'm a hell of a lot better off than the vast majority of people. I don't have 1 ounce of reason to complain. So,
I think there was a reference that at your time at St. Benedict's, there was a particular, I don't know if it was a psalm or a quote from scripture that has always meant a lot to you. Does that ring a bell? I'm gonna pull up my notes.
well, the logo of the football and wrestling was Benedict Hates a Crit. I'm trying to think the Psalms. I learned some.
Well, at least in the Defiance book, there's a quote saying, "As a prisoner of war, George maintained a fierce devotion to his faith, reconciling his wrath with Matthew 5:39. In the verse George had memorized at St. Benedict's, Jesus had admonished, 'Whoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also.' He also drew strength on the biblical story of Abednego. Is that, I'm pronouncing it right?
I always had a hard time pronouncing myself. I jump right to your help. Abednego or abstract, something like that. It's close to abstract.
Mesach and
Yeah.
Sadrach, the faithful
Meshach and Abednego, yeah.
Yeah,
Meshach.
who were cast into Babylon's fiery furnace for refusing to worship the idols of King Nebuchadnezzar.
I guess one of the things that throws me is my weird personality, actually, is that there are a lot of things that I would quote, and it would be very meaningful. And I would know basically where it comes from. But like I could quote you all kinds of stuff in the Bible. I've studied it extensively, but I couldn't tell you what chapter and verse it was in. To me, that's meaningless.
Right.
I mean, that's just me. What difference does it make if it's Matthew chapter 3 or Matthew, verse 5 or verse 10? It's in there. If you want to find out, go look the thing up. But I never remember, and even today, like I will read a book and I could tell you a book in detail, but I won't remember the author because it wasn't important to me at the time. And a lot of times I don't remember the characters. That's why I mentioned these, because when I read a book, these letters indicate a person. Now, if it's an easy pronunciation, George, Jack, Jim, okay, fine, I'll keep using that. That'll immediately pop to mind. But most likely, even if it goes to 2 syllables, my mind will know that those letters are Timothy. But the rest of the book, I will never say, in my head, I will never say Timothy. In my head, it's that person. It's tracking. It's the way my brain functions, which is very different from other people at times. So I know exactly the story you talk about, but when you try to quote a verse, I would have no idea what you're talking about. And then you said the name, which didn't immediately, but as soon as I realized what you're talking about, I know exactly the 3 characters, and I know exactly the story, but I still can't pronounce their names. But I know if I looked in the book, that's that guy, that's that guy, that's that guy. A crazy way my brain functions. So yeah, those things made a great deal to me, but
I totally get what you're saying, honestly. My wife is always like, but you're missing the name of the thing. I don't care about the name. This is the story. This is the thing I get. Well, is there a particular passage from the Bible or from these stories, or maybe the story of these triumvirate who were cast into Babylon's fiery furnace that have always meant something to you? I just am trying to...
well, actually, there are a lot of things, and if we start talking about one, you catch up on it, then all of a sudden you label it with the chapter and verse, and that's fine. It's, it doesn't make it untrue or anything. But a lot of things are going on at the same time, not just those 2. Now, the one about the fiery furnace, that's pretty good, because the 3 guys are being put in there, and in a great respect, it ends up being very much like a POW thing, because they're all being asked to do the same thing, and it's the same meaning of stuff at overeating pork and stuff like that, as Jews being caught by the then Babylonians and Persians. It was really just a matter of honor. They were going through exactly the same thing, or they did go through exactly what we were going through. The only guidance was return with honor, and that meant doing whatever the appropriate things was, and for them, they couldn't eat pork or whatever. And so they get thrown in there one at a time, and the king can't figure it out. Why the hell would you subject yourself to that? Because you don't want to eat a pork chop? Why would I subject myself to torture? Because I don't tell you what aircraft type I was flying. Who cares? We already know. So it's, in a way, it's meaningless, but it's self-respect and living up to your own standards and culture. So we had a great deal in common. And when they made their decision, it wasn't going to be a light decision. Okay, naughty boy, you go back to your store. We're going to really hurt you bad. We're going to take your iPhone away. No, you do it right now. You're going to get shit kicked out and you're probably going to be killed, and not in a pleasant way. So, yeah, a story like that, we're reliving it. Going through exactly the same mental and physical anguish, so to speak. The method of torture a little bit different, but the end result was exactly the same. So things like that would mean a great deal to me. Matthew's there. Also, like the a very popular one that would be more common to most people is the I am the Lord's shepherd, 23rd Psalm, which is a very comfortable prayer when you got time to go through the whole thing. I say the whole thing because there were times when I couldn't mentally focus that well to get all the way through something as long as that. But there are quite a few of the Bible stories like that at one time or another goes through your mind. And sometimes if you remember as you tell one story today, that it pops out to you. And so suddenly you remember it and you write it down. But collectively, give me some time, I could sit down and give you at least a half dozen examples, but collectively they build a story or a structure which becomes a faith thing that gives you strength. And it's all made up bits and pieces. It's not made up of one singular psalm or one particular little verse from this gospel writer. It's made up of all of these things, and at one time or another, these bits and pieces really helped you a great deal. And sometimes at my age, ask me to remember each one of them, and which time is just a little bit challenging.
Is it possible for you to say, let's say, just a half dozen lines from the Lord is my shepherd? Can you speak those from memory?
And the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He maketh a table before me in the presence of my enemies. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Can you say that now and just speak it? If you would repeat that now, just take your time with it.
The way your mind works when you're squirrely as me is I'll take my time and I'll run through the whole thing with them so I got the next phrase down. Because it spits off. The ideas are there, but the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. And you know what? That means a great deal to me right there. When you say, you don't jump to conclusion, but I shall not want, meaning I don't have enough food, or why am I getting tortured? Why don't I get it? I shall not want. I shall not want for anything that's really important. The things you read about is, miscellaneous. I'm your shepherd. You shall not want. Now you got my mind. I can't even get to the next one. Lord, He leadeth me through paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Again, how do you want to interpret that? He's led us through a very, very maze, difficult, obstacle path, just strewn with problems and disease and horror and everything else. He leads me through paths of, righteousness. And basically, again, stick with me. We'll get to the far side. And that's where it goes on. You go through it and says, how does that really affect me? You can take it I suppose you could take it in a negative way or a very positive way. My cup runneth over. How could you think of that in a POW camp there in Hanoi? and I could look around in the midst of some of the worst possible situations, and I know Jim Stockdale. I know Jerry Denton. I know George McKnight in immense, intimate detail. And the same thing with Nels Tanners. I know everything about their lives. There are no secrets left. Over the years we've tapped out, we've shared everything. I know Jim Mulligan across over there. Okay, I'm not having steak tonight. Bed's not very comfortable. But would I trade what I have for those comfortable things? In a certain respect, in the midst of that misery, my cup runs over.
Sorry, excuse me 1 second. Take a glass of hot water. Thank you. Beautifully expressed. Oh my God. I'm going to be conscious that I told you we would do this in 3 hours. We want to we're going to get you demonstrating the tap code a little bit. But I want, before we draw to a close, I wanted to see, I've asked you the questions I've had in mind, but that doesn't mean that's in any way an exhaustive. There's so much that I'm learning from you. But I would like to invite you to, if there's something that you perhaps feel I haven't touched on that's an important part of your story, or something you'd like to share for leaders in the military, future leaders.
Any help in peanut gallery?
Personal responsibility. Personal responsibility.
We've talked all around it. We haven't used that term. And again, in talking to a group, that came up as a big time personal responsibility. And we have said exactly what I could say right now. We just haven't used that term. That you can't blame anybody else for how you act. You could say you can blame them for putting you into that position. You can blame somebody else for torturing you. But there comes a point when you have to take responsibility for what you do. And you can't walk away from it. You can't rationalize it because of all these other inputs. In the end, if you're there, what you do, you have to take responsibility for, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And we've talked around that type of a situation to a great extent. But that word didn't come up with this. Again, a talk that they generated and pushed me almost like in the corner, like I was almost kind of trying to avoid it. And finally I said, hey, kid, this is you. I don't have any fast answers for you. You got to stand up and have the guts to do the right thing that you think is right. That's your responsibility. You can't get away from it. And they were really rattled, but then they pursued the questions. And really that's what they're, because nobody had held them accountable, nobody had made them responsible, they hadn't really put it in those words. And I just fell into telling them, no, it's you make the decision. And sometimes nobody else can do it. And the one way I can tie it back to something that actually you told me, and I'm just trying to picture it, and I guess the thing that is impact is not that I have something new to say, but if I can convey to you like my lack of understanding. You talk about the coach academy looking out there at all these crowds and this great big day before a game with the Army that they know they're going to lose. They're all looking dejected. And what's he supposed to say to them? And I just try to put myself there. Hey kids, try this on for size. There's 11 guys here. Call it a football team. We've had the living torture, shit tortured out of us over the last 2 months. You won't believe how darn hard and painful and miserable and challenging it was. And you know what? They have told us that we're going to get tortured again next week. Now, do we look like losers? Do we look like we feel dejected? Or would you look at us and say, maybe we're winners, even though we know we're going to lose? Ain't no doubt in our mind. Then we get crap, and we're going to wind up doing some stuff, and then we'll have to get up probably the week after that and do it all again. But do you see us looking dejected? It's like, you think you got problems? You look up and you do the best darn job you can, even though you're going to get the hell beat out of you, and even though you may lose the next little encounter. And this comes back to the same thing too, that personal responsibility. You got to stand up and smile and do the best damn job you can do in the worst personal circumstances. That's all we expect, that's all we want, and that's what you should do.
Thanks, Pam. That was great. That was fantastic. I can actually see a coach playing those very words to a team. You want to demonstrate the tap code?
Let me get one shot just before we move. George, can you just rub your left knee with your hand briefly? I just need to use that as a cutaway. Yeah, and then take your hand away for a second, and then do it again. And then take your hand away. Great. That's a perfect cutaway for when you're talking about why you have to stand in church or sit. Thanks. Anyway, tap code?
Yeah, and also on this angle, we could get this as a cutaway on the pocket cinema or something another day, but George's scars are on this side that your camera can't see, so we
Okay.
want to
Oh, yeah.
cover that
Okay,
at some
good.
point.
Yeah.
All right, so what we're gonna do
You're
is
gonna be on the,
we purchased a really nice board at Home Depot.
You're gonna be on my left side.
I'm gonna take this place. Are you comfortable tapping with your right?
Yeah, that's
That's what he did.
yeah,
He's a righty.
yeah.
Talk me
I'm
into it.
ambidextrous,
I
but
think
tapping
actually
is.
the other side is cleaner.
Let's see, we don't have a sample here.
You want me standing in this same position, but tapping on the wall, huh?
You're gonna sit.
You're gonna send me right back. You realize this is back tapping. That's how I got in trouble with Stockdale. This side.
Bill,
All right, so spin
Okay.
it a little bit more. There you go. That's good. Let me,
No, tapping's gonna be rough on the back side. That's all I'm telling you.
I can scoot it down here more. Is that better?
No, he needs to be this way.
okay, let me adjust your camera. Hang on just a second,
Oh.
Patrick.
That's why I got nervous, because this takes more coordination
Oh.
than this
Then
here. You
this.
see how my
You
arm
wanna
is
tap on
resting
this
here?
side? Can we set that up,
Well,
Bill?
we have to move the key and everything. Let's do it this way.
Well, I can do it. I'm just
The
saying that
light is over there. We
it'll
have
be
to
effective, but
stand
it may not, it may not be totally. I don't know.
Well, listen, I've heard you're like one of the fastest tappers coming out of the Hanoi prison system. So you not doing it at the top of your game is better than half the guys.
Oh, yeah.
They couldn't keep up with you when you got to Unity.
Well, did Stratton tell you that?
I read it actually in but
Stratton was the only guy when I got back there. So one of those 8 walls, it turned out that area butted up to room 7, and they realized I was over there, and they tried to tap to me. Nobody could. The only guy that could hear me was Stratton.
he could follow
He
you.
could
That
follow
makes
me.
sense.
Nobody else. There's room there of 50 people, and they couldn't understand me.
Don't rotate it. Just lean the top towards him just a little bit. Yeah, just trying to get it vertical.
And were you like Doug Hegdel, where you couldn't slow down because it'd be like riding a bike and you'd fall off?
Well, to a great extent, yeah. I mean, if I slow down, Now, if you say slow down, it's going to go down to. I got to think now. So, like you'll slow down by a factor of 500%. You can't slow down by 20%.
Okay, I'm gonna do the close-up and you're gonna do his head and his
Yeah,
hand.
but for me, I could use the board closer to the back of the chair. Is that going to
That's
mess
fine.
you
I
up?
mean, slide it along
Here,
its plane.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Let me,
I mean, rotation or
I'm gonna.
just slide it up.
I want to get it more in like here.
Can you get his hand on it? Yeah, okay, that'll work.
Does that work for you?
Yeah, and then I'll have to talk Carrie into getting it vertical again. So push the top towards him, Carrie.
Mhm.
A little bit more. You gotta pull the bottom away from it, cause you're gonna contact the chair now. So pull the bottom away. Just push the bottom away, there you go. And then push the top towards you, yeah, now it's vertical. Too much, right there. Okay, where are you gonna have your hand, sir?
Well, that's the
Show
only
me
place
what
gonna
you
fit
got
if you want
going.
me sitting down.
No, it's cool.
That works.
Now, hang on, let me just, can you put it there again just briefly? I just need to make sure you're in focus. Okay, I'm ready. I'm gonna do just his hand, you're gonna do hand and face, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good.
All right, so you choose the message, but start off as you would a basic communication. Your first thing, talk a little bit about the tap codes first, and then demonstrate some of those communications. Like for instance, there was a way that you always could signal each other. Yeah, I'm definitely in
Push
America.
the top toward, there you go, just hold it right like that, there you go.
In other words, I'm talking about shaving a haircut.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would first just talk generally about the tap code.
The tap code is something that I think the second POW brought back from some kind of a kindergarten class his kid went to or something, but it all been from the very, very beginning, so to speak. The tap code came into existence, and it's very, very versatile. It can be done 1,000 different ways, and so it stuck. And we've kind of gone over about why it really, in a certain respect, was very secure. You just had to learn it. And then there'd be the speed and the shortcuts and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the beginning of it was something, I guess I was just a tiny bit too young, because I had heard about shaving a haircut, but it didn't, like viscerally or visually click in what they meant by that. And I know when they tapped, I understood it, which was, other side, But when you say shaving a haircut, that everybody else did except for me and a couple other guys, and I think it was age. We were just a little bit on the young side to understand that. But that's how he called up anyway. Was they would say, hey, you're on the line, and yeah, if it's clear, you could do it. And if it wasn't, you'd get a thump telling you see a shadow of a guard or something like that. So basically, you'd start off. And before you get carried away, I'll also point out how we always ended up. Some people would just say, see you later, which was CUL. Everywhere I went, and again, that wasn't necessarily that expansive in terms of the different camps and people, but we always sounded, good night, God bless you, GNGBU, which is my license plate, and some other things that might show up in a book, anything. That's always the way we signed off at the end of the day. If we were tapping during the day and we're just going to wait, then we might see you later, taking a lunch break, whatever else was going on around us. But at night, we always ended up with good night, God bless you. Then everything else was whatever you talked about at the time.
And talk a little bit about, if you will, about what would make, like, for me, I might be able to figure out the matrix, but to follow your shorthand, like the shorthand that you had developed, in effect, what are the things in the, where they, what's like BFF, Carrie, what is that called, when they have these shorthands now, been texting and.
Oh, many of them like LOL and things like
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
But you guys had a shorthand long
Yeah.
ago.
Okay, like I changing went to was I been to instead of TO, quiz 4-5, ATT, by that time he had cut me off, attitude, CK, CC, so attitude check. Nothing I'd have to tap all the way out, most likely, except that'd be one thing, nothing in O, T, which is G, and a slow G like that is ING. Nothing, to, re, He didn't cut me off, nothing to report.
Beautiful. That's fantastic. That's so good. Anything else?
For people who have never heard of the tap code before, could you describe how it works and tap out like the first 5 letters
Okay.
of the alphabet? Tell us what you're doing as you do it.
It's a 5x5 matrix. You leave out the letter K, so it goes A through E, F through J, because then you drop the K, L through N, O, P, then Q through T, U, and V through Z. And what you do is you tap down and across. That was the mistake. I tapped across and down. So like I've been typing, well, G, let's say high, H-I. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 2, 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3 is I. That's H-I, high. Why did I just do that backwards? Good night, God bless you. The only God. G was 2 down, 2 across, so it's just 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Good night happens to be also 3. It's right in the middle of that block. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Good night. God again. 1, 2, 1, 2. God bless was 1, 2, because it's B. 1, 1, 2. We're not going across. And U was 4, 5, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. T is 4, 4. U is 4, 5. And so you just go down and across. So the first letter starts you off, that would be A or B or 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4. E would be 1, 5, 1. Next row is 2, and of course the second letter is G. H was 3, 2, 3, 2, 4 was high. H, I, J, and like I said, we dropped K. L we used a lot because within context and usually just 2 people, L could wind up meaning a holding place for a lot of things. Wheel, you'll, live, love. Man, in context, all you got to do is tap L and the rest of the word could likely make sense to you. M not too big. N was very big because, and that was the one I was mentioning about Jerry Denton. N was A and D. The letter is 3, 3. And Jerry did it, and I can't even. There was no break between the 3 and the 3. There was like a ghost or a shadow, but there was not a break. And nobody can tap that in the way Jerry Denton does except Jerry Denton. N-O-P. Q was a big one, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4 down, 1 across, because that stood for quiz, questions, ask. You could just use it a lot of different ways, and that one letter would get you going. In our world, don't forget, we don't have that many choices. You might just hear that, oh, you could be quiz. But like if I put IQ or just start off with Q, that's either going to be a quiz or a question and go on from there.
It's fair to say that not only did you understand the communication going on through the tap, but from what I understand is you learned to read how someone's doing that day just by the way they were tapping, like their state of mind, their state of emotions. Can you speak a little bit about that?
You could. It's extremely difficult to demonstrate because you're talking about such a nuance of change, or like say like a shadow, like that way Jerry tapped the N. George, almost anybody I think, but I know George would tap slower. How do you tap slower? Just tell you can't do that. Or if you're going to tap slower, such as an L, 3, 1, okay, I could do that fast, but if you really told me to go slow, I mean, I got to count like I'm doing now. 1, 2, 3, 1. I never tapped and counted, not after the first few weeks anyway. But you could feel a little bit of a slowness, kind of like drudgery, and you would know he wasn't feeling good. And first thing you come back with, U, O, C is K. You okay? And usually we didn't BS each other. He'd come back, I feel like crap. I got a cold. I had diarrhea last night. So yeah, you could tell how they felt. If they're exuberant, usually they're exuberant by being loud. And this would be very, very typical of if you tell a joke, and I told you, every time they tap, they cut you off every letter. And so you're going along telling a joke, you finally get through the punchline and the word, then you hit it, you go, same way as a hashtag or something they do, and that's a great big, no shit. All right. So there's different ways to express yourself in speed or slowness, deliberate slow, or sometimes increase in volume and sometimes lower volume. And that is so, I mean, personal, not in an individualistic sense, that I could only really explain it between me and this guy, because this guy and that guy could be different.
And you had mentioned that it's really hard for a third party to listen in, because the person you're talking to would send 2 taps to respond that they got it.
Right.
But if you're the third person, you can't tell the response from the sender.
That's right.
Describe that a little bit from your point of view.
Well, like I sign off good night, but I bless you. The guy knows this is coming, so he wouldn't talk. But let's not we're talking, such as George McKnight, and I'm trying to explain a carburetor to him, and I came up with the word, or he was sending me the word chemical. So you're going like, okay, do, okay. Then I go tap tap. I got do. You tap tap. You understand. That's a long word. You, he might pick it up by then, tap, tap. Okay, if he, do you understand how? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, all the way before you got how, tap, tap, how, this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that's this, STS is this, way, W, 5, 1, 2, 3, A, W, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, way, D, which is just T. Then he keeps tapping 2 times after all these times. Well, I'm getting confused when I have to remember to tap those 2 times, because that's not me, that's his job over there. But if you're listening to this over there, you're hearing both sets of these taps. And you don't realize, especially on the longer words, and it can get extremely confusing for you, because he may not tap when I'm sending 1-letter meaningful things. But as soon as I have to say how, he may not pick up on it until I tap out the W and let me know he has it, bang, bang. So it's HOW ... Well, the only ... and only if it's separated, is A. So how, A, but meanwhile, I've gone into the next letter. And again, if it's really a word that he's going to have to absolutely close off at a dot, whenever he closes off, he understands in his head, I hope he does when I'm sending it to him, and I'm on to the next word with the first letter of that word. Somebody listening to it may not know where he is. On top of which he's gotten thoroughly confused by the interruptions of these 2 taps that he can't distinguish from the sender's taps from the sender's recognition tap. Because that's exactly what it sounds like. I can go slow, but you tell me which one sounds different. How are you? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. How? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Oh, how? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2. How? Are? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Are, the letter U. You. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Did you get the difference in those sounds there somewhere? Those 2 taps that I threw in are absolutely indistinguishable from what I'm sending. And the only way you're hearing this, you're not hearing this, where you can find a direction. All of this you hear is on a wall. So if you listen to the wall right there, you have no way of knowing if that sound's coming from here or there or even upstairs. We know this works because we have transmitted across walls as much as 50 feet. But you listening have no idea where that sound is coming from. The only other possibility is if every one of my taps, if I said hi, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and he comes back with, so it's like slower or louder, you may be, there's a different tapper there. But man, you're going to have to keep up with it all the way through, distinguishing those 2 taps from the original, the person sending matches, whatever they're tapping away.
Fantastic.
We were in situations that we tried it, we couldn't do it. I can't do it.
And one last question, sir. How did Alcatraz get named?
I think several of us take credit for it. It was really just kind of accidental. 11 guys wake up, where the Sam Hill are we? It's this little tiny compound. It's not like any place else, but obviously set up. There were 10 dungeon-like cells, no doubt about that. tiny little space, and it's like, my God, where is this? And the courtyard is very small. I mean, this is like a little self-contained capsule here that we're stuck in. Irons on all night, which is, as a normal way of doing business, was not usual. On for a long time, very, very close guards, more guards per person. I mean, they had the same number of guards as they did if there'd been 50, 100 people there. And somewhere, and like I thought it's more like, good God, this place is worse than Alcatraz. Whether I said it first or somebody else said it first or something similar to that, a comment like that went out and bingo, it stuck. Alcatraz. You know, the last sinkhole when all else fails, you go to Alcatraz. And that just popped up in the next day, tapping's going on like crazy. Where are you? What have you seen? Did you see anything? Who's here? Because they didn't know at the time, who we were. And I would say within the first 24 hours, I kind of a comment, good God, this is worse than Alcatraz, and it stuck.
Beautiful, sir. Okay, so we should tail slate, Carrie? You got everything?
Yeah, I'm still rolling.
And then I'll put the slate tone in, and then we can cut, okay?
You got it.
And go ahead, Care.
Okay, got
I'm
that.
gonna put in slate tone.
Turn now.
Yeah, we'll do that on a separate.
Yeah, we should cut and then
Yeah, I'm gonna
roll
cut